Welcome, everybody. ACME would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands and waterways of Greater Melbourne, to the people of the Kulin Nation, and recognise that ACME is located on the lands of the Wurundjeri people. We also acknowledge First Nations people as the original storytellers of this land and recognise their significant contribution to the contemporary moving image. I'd also like to acknowledge First Nations people joining us today on the webinar. My name's Zoe. I'm a producer of school programs here at ACME, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you back for our last session on generative AI with Leon Furs. Today's session will be about video games, AR and VR with generative AI. We will have, as usual, a few minutes for questions at the end of the webinar. You're welcome to use the Q&A function on your Zoom, and if you have any things that pop up for you along the way. We actually had the great privilege of hosting Leon here at ACME yesterday for a hackathon, which Leon will tell you about in more detail in his presentation. And we actually filmed Leon's presentation live here yesterday. So Leon will be online as a real person during the session and towards the end. So he will be here to answer any of the questions you might have along the way. So we hope you enjoy today's session, and it's over to Leon.
Welcome back, everybody. And if this is the third session in a row that you're joining us for, that's fantastic. If you haven't caught the other sessions on multimodal generative AI, then those recordings will be available on the ACME website. And this session is focusing specifically on games and the intersection with virtual reality, augmented reality, and generative AI. For the most part, I'm going to be focusing on games design because we haven't really spoken about that yet. We've looked at video and audio generation. We've looked at image generation. And in last year's series, we looked at the basics of Gen AI. But games is a bit of a new frontier for many of these technologies. So in this situation, I'm going to look at the back end and front end of games development, and I'm looking at AI for both coding and designing games and virtual reality experiences, and then also for developing things like game assets, images, and finished games. For now, we can't really create an entire game from generative AI. We're not quite at the stage yet where we can go from a text prompt to a fully developed game. But we can certainly use generative AI in a lot of the parts of games design, and out there in industry, this is already happening. We'll also talk a little bit about the future of games and VR design, and I'll finish this session by exploring what we've done here at ACME with a student hackathon recently. So let's talk about the back end of games design, where we are working with things like the design, development, some of the structural components of the games design, and some of the planning, and also starting to develop some of the code that will go into making the finished product. Now, I'm not a games designer or a software developer. I'm an English teacher and a media teacher by trade. So I'm really interested in how these technologies can contribute to things like narrative design. And I've seen recently a few great examples where people are using platforms like ChatGPT, Microsoft Copilot, Claude to assist in narrative design, to assist with things like character development, the story arc, the setup of the game, and the establishment of all of that really important story before the actual coding and programming begins. And if you're a gamer, if you play games extensively, you'll know that the best games have some kind of compelling storyline to draw you through. And I think about really successful games recently, like the recent Zelda, Breath of the Wild, and Tears of the Kingdom games, which are, tremendously popular with young people and adults. And really, what makes those stories so great is that they're open, they're immersive, but they have a compelling storyline and characterization. So you can certainly use platforms like ChatGPT for these kinds of applications. I'm using, in this example here, just GPT 3.5, which is the free version. But I think it's important to point out that just as we're putting this session together, OpenAI have announced that they have upgraded their free model, and they're now allowing free users to use GPT-4, which has really advanced coding capabilities. So in the free model of ChatGPT now, you can use it for brainstorming and idea generation, just like I'm doing here on the screen. Or you can actually use it for some of the really capable coding capabilities of the GPT-4 class model. So that's put really powerful tools in the hands of all of our students. Now, the prompt that I'm using here on the screen is quite long and elaborate. I'm giving a lot of detail. I'm working on a fantasy text-based adventure game. I'm going to turn it into a point and click. I want it to have 4 characters. I don't want it to rip off Lord of the Rings because that's kind of its default position. And you can see that it will go into this fairly elaborate description of things like the characters, the settings, Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, and the whole narrative structure. So if you're thinking about doing some games development or some games design work or working with students, this can be a really good way to kickstart some of those ideas. You can see as well that it's made some suggestions at the end there for gameplay mechanics. So it's suggested point and click or text-based choices. It's giving you character-specific abilities, interwoven storytelling. So all of those aspects of the narrative and the mechanical planning side of games design can be done with ChatGPT or Microsoft Copilot as a bit of an assistant in the background. I think that those, really rich and exciting ideas for games are still going to come from human developers, obviously, but this is an addition as part of that kind of brainstorming and planning process. If you're working with students or young people, if you're working in education, you're teaching games design, then often getting some of that planning done can be a bit of a stall before you get to the actual process of the coding and the development side of things. So it can also help with those aspects. One thing that I think is really fun to explore is this idea of using generative AI to create text-based adventures. So if you're my age, and I'm not going to tell you how old I am, but if you are my age, you might remember text-based adventures on older computers where you enter a dungeon and it describes the dungeon in text and then tells you to go left or go right or pick up a key and move through the dungeon, fight enemies and so on. And that's become a really sort of classic part of online course development. If you're doing courses in things like Python, HTML, JavaScript, it's really common to come across this text-based adventure as one of those early lessons. I also know from working with a lot of schools that when they're teaching digital technologies, STEM style courses, particularly in the middle school, that the text-based adventure is a really common way of teaching things like if-else statements, for and while loops, and even teaching things like lists, arrays, and dictionaries when it comes to creating inventories for your characters. So text-based adventures is a classic way now to teach programming languages, also something that generative AI can do a really good job at assisting with. So if I say to ChatGPT, and again, just using the free version, write a script in Python for text-based adventure game, it will give a very broad and very generic adventure game, but something that we can treat as the basis for working on maybe with students in our classes, or maybe just working on this for our own amusement. You can see that it's creating some functions here. It's got some print statements to say what the game's going to look like. It's providing some of those if choices. So if you choose to go backwards, this happens. If you choose to go left, this happens, right, accept, decline, and then it will create the game loop. And if I just copy that code and paste it into a little Python environment, I'm just using online-python.com here, which is a free Python development environment. If I paste that code in and run it, you'll see that it works accurately straight away. So we've got welcome to the adventure game. You find yourself in the entrance of a dark, ominous forest. You go left or right. If I type left, it says you venture deep into the forest and come across, and so on and so forth. And even just using this as the basis for some code, you can now get in there and edit this yourself manually, change some of that language. You can see it's given a great starting point for that classic text-based adventure game scenario. This is Claude. Claude is a really powerful model. Far fewer people have used Claude than ChatGPT in my experience, but it's a really great model. It doesn't have an internet connection, but it is really proficient at language and code. I'm using Claude 3 Opus here, which is the paid version. The next tier down is called Claude 3 Sonnet, and it's equally as good as ChatGPT 3.5, almost as good as GPT-4. What I'm doing here is I've copied the description from earlier that ChatGPT generated for our narrative and characters, copied that into Claude and said, use this information to create our text-based choose your own adventure game. And you can see the difference here is that it's given a little bit more structure to the code. So it's, rather than just coming up with a generic adventure game, it's come up with a game which is much closer to the character profiles, the descriptions, and some of those elements that I actually asked for in that earlier piece. So Claude will write very proficient code, just like ChatGPT. It will pretty much work as soon as you copy and paste it into an environment. This is not going to replace professional programmers anytime soon. This is not very complex or sophisticated code. It's certainly not at the level of an expert human coder. But particularly if we're working with young people and they're learning code, these tools are widely being used in industry already. So GitHub Copilot, which is in the GitHub environment and is deployed by Microsoft. Microsoft Copilot, which can also write code, ChatGPT, Claude, all of these tools are being used out there by software developers, games designers, to help assist in writing code, to help with error handling, even for sort of mundane tasks like adding the comments into code. So those are a couple of ways that you could think about the kind of back end of using generative AI, one for designing narrative characters profiles, another for trying out simple code with text-based adventures. But you can also create more complex code with these. So Unity is a very powerful games development platform, and similar platforms like Unreal Engine are out there where developers are able to make very comprehensive games. So, Fortnite, for example, a lot of those games, they can handle code like C++, C#, and ChatGPT and all of these other platforms can easily write code in all of those programming languages as well. So here I've said, write some code for Unity to have a non-player character patrol a rectangular area in a random pattern. And you can see it's writing some code in C#. It knows which modules to import. It knows how to construct that code. It's adding the comments in there so that, a human reader can follow that code as it goes along. And then once it's finished writing the code, it actually explains its rationale for making some of those choices as well. So even if you are doing some games development in these more advanced platforms, generative AI can potentially help out, testing out things, writing some code in more advanced languages like C#, and helping you to understand those languages and coaching you through developing those parts of games. So you might have an interest yourself in games design. You might work with young people. You might have kids who are interested in games design. I would be pointing them towards some of these generative AI tools and starting to say, okay, just think of some ideas, do some brainstorming, see if you can come up with like a minimum viable product or a bit of a pilot or a prototype for something, because it's quite impressive what you can build, even if you have very limited experience in programming languages and in games design. Okay, let's move on now to the front end. Let's have a look at what it looks like from the player's experience side. So this is where we start thinking about whether artificial intelligence can be used for the creation of graphics, for various assets, 3D parts of the games, maybe even for playable parts of the games, or we interact with non-player characters. So in the first session in this short series, I spoke about non-player characters. I spoke about companies like Nvidia, which are putting out their large language model powered non-player characters that you can interact with. So I just wanted to look at another example of that. This is a company called InWorld, and InWorld is in partnership at the moment with Microsoft Xbox, looking again at developing AI-powered non-player characters. So let's just take a look at this video here.
What does Jabba smell like?
Jabba the Hutt smells like a mixture of spices and sweat. What do you think of humans?
Oh, humans? Well, I have mixed feelings about you all.
You're much more sophisticated, you're saying, than your predecessor, Natty.
Natty is a name I'd rather not hear again. That's all I'll say on this matter.
Be careful. There's an abnormally large charger guarding the power core. Watch out.
See, you're also observant. I'm just fighting with it.
What side quests were we working on?
Ah yes, we were working on the side quest, where we need to bring some outlaws to justice.
We're a movement, and we're committed to making sure that robots never threaten our way of life again.
So go ahead and pull the trigger if that's what you want.
Well, I kind of asked for it, I guess.
What can you do for me?
I can show you all the fun places to visit in Kidstopia.
We're going to take out the enemy's main hive. Here's your gun. Follow me.
Okay, so now we've got another example here from Claude using a slightly different prompt. I'm going to say create a detailed description of the first setting. So I've gone back to the bit of code that I generated earlier, the little Python text-based adventure game. And now I'm getting Claude to generate a detailed description, first of all, of the first setting, Grimforge, the cavernous underworld. And this is so that I can use generative artificial intelligence as part of that design and sort of concept art process. So in a moment, we're going to look at a way that games developers are using this to generate the real artworks for their game. For now, I'm just generating some concept art, maybe a few ideas of what the setting might look like. So I've asked it to convert that into a prompt for an image generator. I'm going to pop that into Adobe Firefly. Try that prompt out. You can see here Adobe Firefly will give us 4 choices. I've talked about this in some of the previous sessions, so you get quite a lot of control over how these images work. In Adobe Firefly's latest version, version 3, we've got some really great sort of little tags and features that we can turn on and off. I can re-roll if I don't like any of those images. I can adjust things like the style references. I can use this little panel on the left-hand side here to create different visual styles, different artistic movements, different color schemes, and all kinds of different features here. So I'm going to keep playing around with Adobe Firefly until I get my Grimforge scene that I'm interested in. I've got at the moment a structural reference turned on, and I've got it on photo mode. In a moment, I'm going to remove that structure reference so that you can see what it looks like without it. And really, this is a way of assisting that kind of idea generation or part of that process of the development of the game. So we might not use any of these images for the final product, or if we're making a kind of point and click adventure game, we might actually use this for some of the set design. But we might also use it for concept art. We might use it as part of a pitch to pitch this game to somebody else, the background for a loading screen, any of those kinds of components. We can absolutely use generative AI to help out with that scenario. So here's a background now based on the setting from the original piece of text that we generated. You remember I generated the narrative and the story arc and the characters in ChatGPT in the first part. Then I had Claude write some code around that as part of that kind of text-based adventure model. And then I've now gone into Adobe Firefly and created some images to back that up. So it's a nice little workflow, certainly something that you can replicate in education with students, but also something which is happening out in the wild. So this is Echoes of Somewhere. And Echoes of Somewhere is a game and a website at the moment. And the developer is actually working in the open using ChatGPT and Midjourney and a range of other AI tools to create an entire game from scratch. Now, he's also a games designer, so he has a lot of experience in the industry, a lot of experience using tools like Blender for 3D editing. And you'll see that he's documented his entire process from start to finish. So this is a really great case study in how generative AI is being used to assist in the games design process. Now, this developer is not just relying on generative AI tools alone. They're using this as part of that whole workflow. So you can go to his website yourself and check out some of the videos, but we're going to see combinations of tools like Midjourney used to generate a background image and then being upscaled, made higher quality, higher resolution with another AI tool called Magnifique. You've also got the developer writing some of the code, like I demonstrated earlier, some of the code for Unity and C#, generating scripts to assist with the 3D, generating code to assist with everything from the dialogue to the actions and movements of the character. It really, really is worth checking out if you're at all interested in this process from start to finish. And I wanted to finish this session by talking about how we're actually applying some of this in person recently at Acme. We've run a generative artificial intelligence games design hackathon with students. And it's the first time we've tried anything like this. So for myself, running these kinds of sessions, most of my time is spent working with educators on helping them to understand how these technologies work. And we really haven't experienced a great deal of student voice in this space at the moment. So it was really great to get a group of students down and to go through this process of how can AI be used for games development. So we did a lot of activities on the day, and we ran the session from 10 until 2:30. And we're going to be turning the videos and some of the photos from this day into a resource for educators to help people learn how to run their own version of an AI hackathon. And the students on the day did an incredible job from start to finish, using tools that they started off unfamiliar with. In some cases, they never used any artificial intelligence, or they perhaps used tools like ChatGPT or maybe just Snapchat's AI chatbot. And we used a range of tools, including some of the ones that I've talked about today, Microsoft Copilot, Adobe Firefly for generative artificial intelligence, and other applications. So you can see here on the screen that we've done a bit of image generation here. We started off and we followed exactly the same process that I've outlined throughout this session. So to begin with, we used Microsoft Copilot to generate the story arcs and the character profiles. The students came up with their own original ideas. They brainstormed, they sat in their groups and worked out a few of the basics. And then they went to Microsoft Copilot and they used prompts to flesh out all of those characters and their story arcs. Once they had those narrative elements underhand, they moved into Adobe Firefly. They used all of that detail from their character profiles and the settings, and then turned it into pictures, images, concept art that reflects those characters. So you can see here on the slide, one group created a character called Whiskers and a character called Captain Clawbeard for obviously a cat-themed adventure game. And they were really concise and accurate with the language that they used to describe their characters to get Adobe Firefly to generate exactly what they were looking for. And all of the groups did a fantastic job of taking their narrative work and their character profiles from Microsoft Copilot, and then turning that into very accurate prompts to get exactly what they needed in Firefly. One thing that the students noticed along the way, which I think is something that we all experience when we use AI, is this technology is really weird, and that sometimes it goes off on tangents and it does things which are unexpected or surprising. And I think that something that we're going to learn as we go along with using these technologies is that artificial intelligence is not like traditional software. So with traditional software, you use a piece of software, you expect it to do exactly what it's supposed to do and work in the way that it's intended. If it's not, it's because there's a bug in the code or it's because you're not using it properly, and that's it. With artificial intelligence, because it's a bit random, a bit stochastic, and a little bit unpredictable, sometimes it will work perfectly, sometimes it won't work at all. Sometimes you'll ask it to do something and it will generate something which is very different to what you had in mind. And in some cases, that can be surprising and even useful. So what the students found out in this process in the hackathon is that it pays to be really persistent, to also have a clear idea in your mind about what it is you're looking for, and then to go out there and just really experiment and work backwards and forwards with the tools. In the last part of the day, we moved on from the narrative design and the image generation to the code. Now, these students had all had some experience with coding in their digital technologies class, and they'd had a bit of experience actually using Python to create those if-else choose-your-own-adventure stories. So we leaned into that knowledge and we used Microsoft Copilot to create some of the code behind their games. So you can see here on the slide a few snippets of the code that they generated. One group generated some ASCII cats to use in the menu screen. They've got some of the if then else statements up there in the middle image. And we can see that it's actually using some slightly more advanced features of Python. So we've got some functions here. One group was creating classes. Another group decided to go off in a different direction, which is one of the great things of running a hackathon, and actually created a point-and-click storybook adventure game using HTML and JavaScript, which runs in a web browser. They moved from Copilot into ChatGPT because they found that ChatGPT does a better job of handling the code. And again, they generated images in Firefly, they generated some of the text in Microsoft Copilot, and then they took all of that into ChatGPT and, working in their small group, managed to generate all of the HTML files necessary to create this fully functional point-and-click adventure game. So you click on begin your adventure, it takes you onto the next page of the storybook, and then it starts to diverge and gives you options for 2 or 3 different buttons that you can click, all of which take you off on different branches of the story. So it's really great to work with those students and to work here at Acme to really explore what we can do with young people and these technologies when we can start from very little understanding at the beginning of the day and end up with the very rapid creation of a functioning prototype of a game that fits their design. So as I said, we're going to be producing some resources which support running a hackathon like that in your school with your students. We did it with middle school students in year 9 who were in a digital technologies elective. You might choose to do it as part of an elective, or maybe just something that runs over lunch times for students that are interested in it, or you could work it in as part of a digital technologies or STEM curriculum. I think that the hackathon model's really useful way of getting people to get to grips with these tools and technologies. And I've actually started to run hackathons with adults as well. I do hackathons with teachers and school leaders and all kinds of different communities. It's a great model for just sitting down and getting everybody with their hands on the technology and making something great by the end of the day. So this is the structure that we followed for the hackathon. In the morning, we used generative artificial intelligence for narrative structure and those characters. At midday, we used image generation to realize those settings and characters and to create some concept art. And one of those groups obviously also then incorporated that artwork into their final game. And then in the afternoon, we used generative AI to start writing the code, and we used Python and HTML. By the end of the day, we didn't have fully functional games, but we had all of these little components of games which those students could then take away and work on in their own time if they wanted to take what they've learned and create something entirely new and surprising. So I would really recommend that whether you're interested in game design or not, whether you're a gamer or not, you look at games as a way of exploring what generative AI can do, as a way of looking at multimodal generative AI and what's out there and available at the moment in terms of image, maybe audio, and certainly code generation, so that we can step beyond just using ChatGPT for text, just that kind of chatbot interaction, and start really thinking about how these tools are going to be used in the future. Thank you very much. I hope that you've enjoyed this series of videos. If you have questions, we'll be addressing those in this session, and you're welcome to email Acme and pass those questions along to me. And I'm always happy to respond to messages on LinkedIn or via my website at leonfurs.com with any other questions that you have left. Thanks.
Hi, Leon. Thanks
Hi.
for joining us. That was an excellent presentation. We do have some questions for you from our audience. The first question from Susan: it's great to use ChatGPT for planning, but will students find it difficult to break away from the formulaic ideas produced?
Yeah, so this is a movable feast, every sort of 2 or 3 days at the moment, the technology diverges and goes off in different directions. The kind of formulaic responses that are coming out of Copilot at the moment and coming out of GPT when you're using 3.5, the old free version, are incredibly generic. We saw a bit of that yesterday in the hackathon with the students as they were producing code for those choose your own adventure games. Some really limited code being produced, some really predictable code. But as these models advance, it's getting more and more diverse and sophisticated in its responses. So the model that OpenAI released yesterday, GPT 4.0, is already much more competent at creating more diverse outputs. And I think that trend will continue for a little while. The other thing is that, good quality use of the materials, good quality use of the language models can encourage students away from that kind of really generic response. So that's down to how you're using the technology, how you're creating your prompts. And it's certainly possible to get some pretty interesting outputs. At the end of the day, you get out what you put in. And if you are providing a lot of context and your own knowledge and experience to kind of shape the prompt, you get a much better output.
Another question from Ellen: how would assessment work when making this work in the classroom?
Yeah, it's a big ticket item. So the hackathon model that we did today for a start, I think would make a great small unit of work, and the product at the end of it would be the finished kind of group production. Now, to allow students to use these technologies to the fullest, you really have to say, okay, it's a no holds barred use of artificial intelligence. You can use whichever tools you have available to you. We do have to put some limits around that. So, if we have students using a paid, really powerful model like Claude 3 from Anthropic, which costs $20 a month, then that's obviously going to give them an unfair advantage over a student who's just using Copilot. So that's one thing that we have to take into consideration with assessment. I'm just going to pop into the chat a couple of links. Now, both of those are mailing list sign-up links, but feel free to sign up, get the free ebook, and then unsubscribe if you like. I prefer it if you stuck around, obviously. But the first of those links is a 60-page ebook of all of my articles that I've written about assessment, which includes a few different models for assessment, which might be a little bit more suitable for generative AI. One of the things that's worth reading up on is ungrading, which is exactly what it sounds like, just removing the letter or numeric grade at the end of a unit. And I think this kind of hackathon style project-based learning lends itself really well to that approach. The second of the ebooks is on the AI assessment scale, which we developed last year, myself and Mike at British University Vietnam, Jasper Rowe at James Cook University Singapore. And that scale goes from no AI at one end to full AI at the other. And the activities and the ideas that are in that ebook around levels 4 and 5 of that scale are certainly applicable to this context as well. So I saw that question pop up in the Q&A and I had those links ready, and I'd encourage you to get on there and check out those books.
Fantastic. That's very helpful. Thanks, Leon. A question here. Do you see ChatGPT, etc., in assisting coders and programmers already in the industry, i.e. letting them focus more on complex code and debugging, etc.?
Oh, yeah, definitely. So code writing tools, sometimes code completion tools, which auto-complete lines of code as you're working, they predate ChatGPT, although they're built on the same kind of language model technology, because it's quite easy to train an AI to interpret code at a fairly basic level, because code's so structured and sort of the syntax and the grammar of code is so predictable. So GitHub Copilot is one example that's really widely used across the programming industry. There's still a place for, human expert software developers, because the code that comes out of these models at the moment isn't as proficient as human code. AI isn't as good as complex problem solving or those kind of real sticky problems. But for doing the kind of boilerplate code, or for, pulling in code which is quite generic, a lot of coders are using this stuff already. Another thing they're using it for is to write the comments for code. So, using AI to review the code and then add in the comments that are meant for other human readers, because a lot of programmers, they find that incredibly boring to sit down and kind of write human comments and explain all of their code. So instead of them explaining their code, they're getting the AI to explain the code. Formatting and kind of refactoring code, moving from one programming language to another, is another thing that AI is proving really useful for in industry. So if somebody's written something in Python and it needs to be refactored into a different programming language, or even just refactored into a different kind of structure, AI is really useful for that as well.
Fantastic. That's a great question. I've got a question here. What elements of this process would you say support literacy?
Yeah, that's a great question. Literacy is kind of my original wheelhouse before AI, and I'm really interested in what these tools mean for literacy. Literacy is a really complex subject, obviously, because in education, we often narrow it down to just reading and writing. In my PhD studies, I take a kind of multi-literacies approach. So I'm interested in multimodal text and oracy, oral text, digital texts, and how these literacies all intersect. So I think no one technology can improve literacy. So let's throw the ed tech stuff out of the window to begin with. AI will not improve literacy, whatever some of the advertising around these things says at the moment. But it can definitely be used as an assistive technology for students who, for whatever reason, have issues with reading or writing, for example. So you can use text-to-speech models or speech-to-text voice recognition models. Students could interact with their computers verbally. If we stick in the realm of code and games design, then students could be chatting with a chatbot that can be helping to write some of that code. One thing that I know a lot of people struggle with programming is you have to get all of your spellings and your syntax really correct, because it's so reliant on correct spelling, correct capitalization, correct punctuation. So a lot of students really struggle getting their code to work because they're just hitting, spelling errors, essentially. So in terms of that kind of digital literacy, AI can really help with some of that as well. But, I think that really it comes down to how the humans in the room are using the tools. How are the teachers using the tools? How are the students using the tools?
Fantastic. Another great question. So unless anyone has any more questions, that comes to the end of our series. I'd just like to say big thank you to Leon for your expertise and for joining us for some great discussion as well at the end. These presentations or webinars will be recorded. So we have 2 up on our Acme Education YouTube already. And this one will be uploaded and ready for you early next week. so you can watch the entire series again. I know I'll be going back and rewatching myself. So thanks again, Leon. And of course, if you have any questions about today or any of our other sessions, you can email us at education@acme.net.au. And we look forward to our next collaboration.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Zoe. Thanks, Simon, and everybody in the background for helping to organize these webinars. And thanks, everybody, for joining us this afternoon. See ya.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.